I know it bothers you. It bothers you to waste 1 hour to go in a meeting and put a story point on every ticket. And you always wonder, what is the point of all this? And why do we even call it an estimate when they're just t-shirt sizes or some Fibonacci numbers? And how does it help the product manager? And why do they insist on them? Is it just that they want to feel relevant and bother the engineers? Does this entire process even have any real value? Or should all the PMs be fired? Hello world, my name is Monis, and today we will talk about the famous rivalry between product managers and software engineers, especially on the topic of story points. And our goal is to understand both the perspectives. So without further ado, let's get started.
Let's start with the basics. What exactly is a story point? Well, it's actually easier to explain what it is not. Firstly, it is not a measure of how many days or hours or weeks it will take to complete a ticket. It is not a measure of any unit of time whatsoever. But still, we call it an estimate. It's not an estimate of time, but it's an estimate of something. And that something is complexity. How easy or how difficult a ticket is. For example, changing the color of the login button has lower complexity compared to the actual functionality of authenticating a user. But then, how do we represent this complexity? Let's say we define a scale from 1 to 13, and each engineer on the team has to pick a number to represent the complexity of the ticket. For a simple ticket, like changing the color of a button, most engineers would probably agree on a low number, say a 1, because it's most likely a simple one-line code change. But when it comes to something more complex, like implementing the full functionality of user authentication, estimates can vary wildly. A senior engineer with more experience who has implemented this before might rate it a 5, while others might vote 10 or even 13. With such a broad range of options, it becomes nearly impossible to agree on a single number. And this kind of subjectivity makes the process frustrating and inefficient. To address this inconsistency, teams often use Fibonacci sequence, which looks like this. But why Fibonacci? Well, this is because the gaps between the numbers grow larger as they increase. So instead of arguing over a wide range of numbers, the engineers are forced to think within these buckets. The logic is simple. The further apart the numbers are, the more significantly they represent the increase in complexity. So instead of debating whether the complexity is a 5, 8, 10, or a 13, the discussion shifts to something simpler, like deciding between an 8 or a 13. This helps the team to have a more constructive conversation, ultimately leading to a consensus, say settling on an 8. So great, the ticket has been marked, the PM is happy, but what purpose does it serve? So let's break it down. Most teams work in sprints, which are usually 2-week intervals where specific tickets are planned and tackled. When your PM plans a sprint, they'll add up the story points for all the tickets included. So let's say that the total for this sprint is 20 story points. Now fast forward 2 weeks. The sprint is over and the PM checks how many story points were actually completed. Was it the full 20? Did the team overachieve and deliver 23? Or perhaps less, like 18? The sum of story points for all tickets actually delivered is what we call as sprint velocity. So in this case, if the team completed only 18 story points, the sprint velocity would be 18. Simple enough, right? In the next sprint, let's say the team manages to complete 23 story points. Now the velocity for that sprint would be 23. And here's where it gets interesting. If we consistently track this data over time, say for 10 sprints, we start to notice patterns. We can identify our best sprint, where we delivered the maximum story points, say 24. Our worst sprint, where the delivery was the lowest, say 18. And most importantly, we can calculate the average velocity, the number of story points the team is most likely to deliver in a typical sprint. So we do have a few metrics, but how does it really help anyone? So let's talk about the bigger picture. Imagine your team gets assigned a massive initiative, like building a search functionality that works across all products on a website. There is a ton of work involved, front-end changes, back-end logic, implementing filters to search by name, description, color, brand, and whatnot. Clearly, this isn't something that can fit into a single ticket, so it has to be broken down into multiple smaller tickets. Now, when the CEO asks the PM, how long will it take to deliver this feature, the PM has two choices. 1. Blurt out a random number based on a gut feeling and hope for the best. Or second, take a more calculated, realistic approach. If the PM decides to take the calculation approach, the PM would sit with the engineers and assign story points to each task in this initiative. Let's say the total story points for all the tasks add up to 224. Now, with the knowledge of the team's average velocity, the PM can estimate the work by simply dividing the total number of story points by the average velocity. So if the average velocity is 22, then 224 divided by 22 will be approximately 11, meaning it will take 11 sprints to complete this work. Each sprint is 2 weeks, so it will be roughly 22 weeks, which is approximately 5 months. The PM can add a bit of buffer for any unforeseen circumstances and communicate to the CEO that it will take 6 months to deliver. Now imagine if there were no story points. The PM might have committed an overly optimistic timeline, say 3 months, and left the engineers scrambling to meet an impossible deadline. With story points and a data-driven approach, the PM can set realistic expectations and save the engineers from unnecessary stress. So, while the whole story pointing exercise might feel tedious, it can actually be a lifesaver in the long run. But there is other side of the story as well, where story points are misused. For example, using story points as a unit of time. Some PMs try to directly equate story points to the number of days it will take to complete a task. While this might seem logical at first glance, it completely misses the point. Story points are about complexity, not time. For example, updating all images on a website to a lighter format might seem simple because it's not technically challenging. A quick script can handle most of it. But the actual work, like uploading the image to a CDN, validating and testing, could take significant time. But just because something takes more time doesn't mean it is complex. It could mean that the task is simply voluminous. So, measuring in days loses the nuance of complexity that story points are designed to capture. Another common way the story points are misused is that when team is pressured to deliver more story points than they realistically can. You might have heard an inexperienced PM say, "We are delivering 20 story points, now let's aim for 25 in the next sprint," which is fundamentally wrong. Story points are not designed to measure the productivity of a team. They are designed for planning and forecasting. So when a team is pushed to do more, it can actually backfire. Engineers may start inflating estimates, marking tickets as a 5 when they're actually a 3. So on paper, it might look like the team is delivering more story points, but in reality, no additional work is being done. Sprint velocity turns into a vanity metric, and the true purpose of story points, which is accurate planning, gets lost in the process. Another fundamental mistake with story points is comparing story points amongst teams. For example, a PM who doesn't have a grasp on this concept might say that the other team delivers 30 story points in a sprint and we only deliver 20. This statement is inherently flawed because story points are not absolute, they are relative. They are very specific for a team. One team's 13 could be another team's 5, and because of this, the team velocity of the former team is 30 and of the latter is 20. Both the teams might be delivering the same amount of work but use different numbers for similar tasks. For this reason, there is no meaningful takeaway from this sort of comparison.
So what do you think? Are story points being used in the way that they're meant to be on your team? And what challenges have you faced when working with the other side? See you in the next video. Peace done.